Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, Baltic Sea friends. First of all, I would like to start by congratulating you and the Bonus family for the finalization of the strategic research agenda. And I, of course, also am very happy that you have invited me here to come and give the opening speech. And in that way, also giving me a possibility to share with you how HELCOM envisages the cooperation with Bonus, ensuring that Bonus-funded projects, they will serve as inputs to workable, science-based solutions for the implementation of the HELCOM Baltic Sea Action Plan. And in doing this, I will, during my presentation, firstly give you an example of a very good mode of cooperation and a vital input by scientists to a groundbreaking element that we included into the HELCOM Baltic Sea Action Plan, namely the nutrient allocation scheme. And secondly, in pointing out other areas that could benefit from an equal good cooperation. And here I would like especially to point to the need for interdisciplinary science. And thirdly and finally, and in a way I think it's probably one of the most important areas, I would like to point to some more practical issues that one should take into account in the HELCOM Bonus cooperation. But allow me first to give you this showcase of this very good mode of cooperation that we had between science and policy management. So as you know, the HELCOM Baltic Sea Action Plan is based on an ecosystem-based approach. And one way to realize this, that is through achieving the strategic goal, which is a Baltic Sea unaffected by eutrophication. And one of the 5 ecological objectives, which is reflecting such a sea in such a good status, that is clear water. And it's so lucky that clear water we can measure by a very simple device, the Secchi discs, and we also have measurements for more than 100 years. And moreover, we also see that there is a very good correspondence between the water transparency and then the quantity of plankton algae in the water. And for this reason, for good environmental status in terms of an water transparency, we worked out targets for each of the sub-basins in the Baltic Sea, and we did that with scientists and experts taking part in the HELCOM work. And these indicators with targets, they provided the basis for estimating the quantities of nutrient loads that would need to be reduced in order to reach the desired water transparencies. And here, as you know, we had very good cooperation between HELCOM and the BNI, MAR, and we had a BNI, or rather a NEST model that was a coupled physical biogeochemical model that was covering the whole of the Baltic Sea, and it then calculated the nutrient load reductions that are needed to reach the Secchi depths in the open sea. And as you know, this then led to the total reductions that are needed overall in the Baltic Sea. That was broken down also to each of the sub-basins. And finally, and importantly, this was then broken down to reductions that was required for each country. And I can assure you that in this process, the input from science that was had an invaluable role in backing up the estimation, firstly, of the quantities of the needed nutrient load reductions and allocations of these needed reductions to the Baltic Sea countries that came only after that. And that also involved a true science policy cooperation. We had different models that were examined with the aim to find an equitable model that would be based on scientific information. And in the end, finding a system that everybody could agree to, that of course required quite a lot of negotiations, and without a continuous dialogue between the science and the policy phase, it would not have been possible. And even if there were several reasons which I think made it possible to find an agreement on such a system, I would like particularly to stress one, And this is the importance that the science on the Baltic Sea was actually ripe enough to allow for the modeling and for the rest of the system to be elaborated. And what is now important to stress, that is that there is a review of the nutrient allocation scheme, which is ongoing and which has 3 steps that has been outlined on this slide. Firstly, a review of the environmental targets. Secondly, an inclusion also of the atmospheric inputs of nitrogen into the allocation scheme, because we have now only the waterborne nutrient inputs. And thirdly, we will have both updated data on the nutrient loads, but we will also have a new model run where we will have more than one ecosystem model that will be included, meaning that we will have an ensemble modeling. And I'm sure during today we will hear more about this, because there's actually some of the projects here that are helping us in this review of the nutrient allocation scheme. Now, what we see is a continuation of the good cooperation that was started by the creation of the nutrient allocation scheme and following the adaptive management principle of the ecosystem approach. And here, of course, it's important with actions and monitoring of the status of the environment. But I think it's also very important here to point out that when you have new information, new scientific knowledge, you must also make some reconsiderations. And this is what we see is happening in the case of the review of the nutrient allocation scheme. This now leads me to my second part of my presentation and the identification of areas in need of cooperation, including the importance of the interdisciplinary and policy-relevant science, as well as some more practical issues on the HELCOM bonus cooperation. Now, most of all, what we need is to have developed approaches, not only for eutrophication, but also for other priority areas of the protection of the Baltic Sea. And in particular, future challenges include the development and application of a similar, fully science-based management system to the protection of biodiversity. And we also need to develop such systems for the protection of the marine environment from the effects of hazardous substances and maritime activities. And as HELCOM is ultimately working towards an even further holistic approach and sectoral and policy integration, this is also where maritime spatial planning is coming into the picture. And in this slide, you see some of the uses of the sea space on the same map, like IMO traffic separation schemes, areas to be avoided, EU areas closed for cod fisheries, as well as the Baltic Sea protected areas that has here been colored by green. And maritime spatial planning, that will pose new challenges also to scientific research. And first and foremost, there will be a need for science to embrace a more holistic approach and to help in providing the knowledge base needed to plan the use of the marine space, also at different scales, so varying from the whole of the Baltic Sea, but also down to smaller local areas. For HELCOM, the success in implementing the Baltic Sea Action Plan can be measured by evaluating the policy integration and how well the impacts on the marine environment are taken into account in policies and programs implemented in the Baltic Sea region. And in this way, ensuring that priorities once agreed, that they remain high on the political agenda and that they are then followed up also on the practical level, at the level of the projects and other joint activities. This interdisciplinarity is also seen from the decisions that have been taken at the 2010 HELCOM Moscow ministerial meeting, where it was decided to establish HELCOM as a coordination platform for the regional implementation of the EU Marine Strategy Framework Directive. And the Baltic Sea Action Plan, that fits like a hand in a glove to the directive, and the directive in turn constitutes an environmental pillar of the EU integrated maritime policy. Moreover, we have within HELCOM 2 fora that are again also cross-sectorial. So we have a fisheries and environment forum as well as an agricultural and environment forum. And this has shown to be good ways how to start a positive dialogue between the environment and sectoral authorities on more sustainable fisheries and agricultural practices. And last but not least, we also have a rather newly established HELCOM VASAP working group, which is dealing with maritime spatial planning, and this is a cooperation between two region-wide stakeholders. And we see also now a practical application of recently agreed HELCOM VASAP maritime spatial planning principles, which are taking place within a HELCOM-led Plan Botnia project. And we also have a project Baltic Sea Plan, which is also providing information and input to the work that we are carrying out within this group. Now, all of these issues that I have mentioned, they are covered by the BONUS Strategic Research Program. And for this reason, it seems for me very important in the future process to ensure a possibility for HELCOM to comment on a condensed project outline and content and its relation to the implementation of the HELCOM Baltic Sea Action Plan, the EU Marine Strategy Framework Directive, to request for proposed projects to include an explicit expected impact chapter. So this impact chapter should define what is the expected direct impact of the project on policy making, and maybe even to consider another, what I would call optimal, but you might not agree with me, but I would say it would be an optimal evaluation process towards the goals of BONUS, which would be to firstly evaluate the management relevance of a project, and after that only in the second place, so to say, to evaluate the scientific relevance. And lastly, also to ensure the deposition of BONUS results in public databases. And I would like to provide some credit here to the BONUS Advisory Board, which I think is a very good possibility, by the way, for stakeholders in a little bit more informal and good way to have discussions, and the very good reflections by the chair of the BONUS Advisory Board of these issues that we discussed. Now, having stated all these things, I think that there's just one more issue that I would like also to pinpoint, and that is the need for a continuous dialogue between a project and a stakeholder. And this is both on the project side, but of course also on the stakeholder, in this case on HELCOM's side, in order to avoid that we would have a situation where a project is started up and there would be a dialogue between the project and the stakeholder, and then the project would be running and there would then be a final presentation of the outcome of the project. I think that that would be a pity, and that would not necessarily mean that there would be a possibility to take into account the outcomes of the project in the work of the stakeholder. So I would like to conclude by saying that HELCOM has successfully implemented the ecosystem approach to management of human activities, and we have only been able to do that due to the supporting role of science, which has been really of utmost importance. The dialogue between the scientific community and the policymakers has been fruitful, and in my opinion it needs to be continued and, if possible, even strengthened. And we need to develop workable, science-based solutions also to all the other priority areas, and thereby to support a holistic approach and a further sectoral and policy integration. Thank you.